Now let's talk with Sister Joan. Sister Joan, we are always so delighted to have you with us, and I'm thrilled today we get to talk about you a little bit more in addition to the topic that you're addressing. I want to start by asking you about the part of your message that talked about the perception of God, not as a magician, not as a puppeteer, but grounded in this presence. And for you personally, what I sense is that it's a partnership on a daily basis for you. Tell us how you awake, what motivates you in your personal relationship each day with God, your understanding of that, if you can speak to that a little bit more.
Well, you're asking a wonderful but a difficult question, Dan, because having been in monastic life all my life, I've lived immersed in the scriptures where for the monastic, God and I are a constant conversation. You know, 3-4 times a day, one way or another, in sacred reading or in formal choral prayer. The point is that pretty soon we become what we do.
Okay.
Pretty soon, you know, it's like the happily married couple who finish one another's sentences, who see life through the scrim with the other person's face painted on the scrim. Pretty soon, God's face is on that scrim. And the presence of God becomes the walking companion of life. You don't do anything without the sense of that presence or the measure of that presence. In a sense, I honestly believe that every human being has that and doesn't realize it. We have taught people that life has something to do with your distance from God. Instead of, at the same time, we'll tell them God is everywhere, but not in you. You know, we make life some sort of a hula hoop game. Jump this hoop, get a little piece of God. Jump 2 hoops, get 2 pieces of God. Go to church 5 times a week, get a big piece of God. The Rule of Benedict, written in the 6th century, in chapter 7 on humility, says that the first degree of humility is to be aware of the presence of God in you. It's not a merit theology. You don't buy God. You don't coax God. You don't persuade God. You don't captive God. You don't put salt on God's tail. Like they told you when you were a little kid, you could catch a bird. Put salt in a bird's tail, you could catch God. We spend our lives trying to catch God. Where is God?
It's right here.
Right here. We're slivers of God. The present. Once you become aware of that, once you know that the function is the awareness of God, the growing into the presence of God, the awesome responsibility of consciousness of God, then you can proceed. Then you can stop the false guilt. Then you can stop this vending machine religion or spirituality. Then you can sink into life as it is for you because God is the companion in that life. Then it becomes the conversation of life. So I guess you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
But it's an active participation each day, each moment, with the work that you do, with your writing, with your speaking, with everything.
Well, you always know that everything you're doing is of God. Active participation, sometimes I think it's passive participation. God is there.
Working through you.
I hope,
Right.
or at least me working through God.
Well, that's what I mean. It's this wonderful partnership.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sister Joan, I want to go back to the moment where you got the phone call telling you that you could not go to the master's degree program and explore that a little bit with you. I mean, maybe it's the Protestant in me, but I want to ask, did you ever think of saying, okay, that's what you say, but I have an acceptance letter here. I'm going anyway because I think this is my calling and God could be in that program. We know that religious leaders are fallible and perhaps that person who made the phone call could have been acting out of some other motivation. Did you struggle with that?
I struggled with staying in community as opposed to leaving community, but I didn't think you left God for something as silly as writing. And for me, there was something in me that knew that that path had something to do with the fulfillment of the spiritual life for me. But I want to go back to your question in a different way because, and not minimize, my own struggle was horrendous, and we'll find that out as it goes on a bit. But I always, it was my awareness that that God is above all the gods you make. And I struggled with the notion of whether or not, secretly, I hadn't made writing my own God. So I struggled with a genuine depression at that time. They hardly had a word for it then. Nobody would have said that young woman is depressed. You know, nobody would have said that. They would have said, shape up. You know, offer it up. Obey. Funny how that is not a good recipe for depression, but
No.
it's the only one we had at the time.
Hand it over to the puppet master.
Right,
Yeah.
hand it over to the puppet master. That's right. This is God's plan for you. This is God's will for you. Third cook did not, at a children's camp, I couldn't cook a thing. A third cook meant scrub the floors after all. The good cooks dumped the flour on them. That's what it meant. But there's another side to your question that's important for you as a younger woman to understand. These were the early 60s. Almost no woman would have done that in any circumstance. Women were not self-initiating. They were being educated then. They even, quote, after World War II had jobs then. But the notion, the real clear notion that a woman was a moral agent, an independent clay maker of her own life, who could, as a matter of fact, and should function on her own, was an idea from another planet. It wasn't on this planet at that time. Now you overlay that with what was the theology of religious life on top of it. I always say our theology of suffering was dancing is bad, drinking is bad, hemorrhoids are good. If you really were suffering, I mean, that was all religions.
Yeah.
It was this great, it was, in my opinion, a pseudo-spirituality of suffering. You will find as you go through life, you don't have to make it up. Yeah. You know, you don't have to be the great master of suffering. You'll have plenty. Thank you very much. Just learn to deal with it when it comes. But you overlay that theology of suffering. The more you suffer, the happier you are, the better God loves you, the fuller life will be for you. On that period, and that was of the essence of that theological period,
well,
then you understand.
I'm so glad we have more time to explore this in the coming shows, but thank you for this
Thanks,
right now.
Dan.